Okay, this is me, Brandon Lee Krauth. In the description, you'll see that it says science fantasy settings. Well, I was just talking about what different kinds of science fantasy settings you can have. One of them could be like Rifts, where it's pretty much post-apocalyptic and got everything in it. You can have also like different science fantasy settings, like where it's just a fantasy world, like a typical fantasy world, but instead of being in like an ancient times like typical fantasy is more in the future where it's still got swords and magic, but it also got laser guns and stuff, and robots and sci-fi stuff. You could also have some kind of steampunk thing. You can have it where you could have maybe like a steampunk setting that's kind of science fantasy, where you can have like World War One technology in a fantasy world with still magic and swords and stuff, and you can have a little twist in it to where it has like a War of the Worlds thing where they're in like invaded by aliens from another world. You can have it where it's like maybe like these sci-fi people land on a world that's all fantasy, where it's like sci-fi meets fantasy. You can have like different science fantasy settings, and in your if you put a comment on anything, if you want to put like if you want to what different ideas of science fantasy settings you think and stuff, and different ideas for science fantasy, because there's a bunch of stuff you can do with science fantasy. Like one thing I was thinking of, if I could make a game and stuff, is making where it's like you got a world that's typical fantasy and it's ancient time and stuff, but it's got like it's ancient. No wait, no, I'll go back. It's a typical fantasy world, but it's in the future, and what I call cyber fantasy, where it's still fantasy and magic and stuff. And your typical, you got humans, and you got dwarves, and you got anamorphic races and different stuff that's in fantasy. But it's kind of like almost like fantasy meets kind of like Ghost in the Shell, that kind of like cyberpunk, where it's like everybody's got cybernetics and stuff, and there's still magic and sword and stuff, but a lot of people's like all hooked up to computers and cybernetics and like technologies took it over, but there's still magic and swords. So just any ideas of science fantasy settings you got, I'll put in the comments you can. If you're not, give a like or anything. Subscribe if you want to. See.